WNST, Towson, Baltimore. Programming that we like the least, and certainly in the last few hours of 2017, the wallowing in the misery of an evening where I literally sat on my couch and I said to my wife every, 18 minutes or so, I can't believe they lost. I mean, I can't believe that happened. I can't believe that's the way they're going to leave this thing. Luke Jones joins us now from Owings Mills in the aftermath not only of the game, the loss, the New Year's Eve into the new year, but then the cleaning out of the lockers, which happened really before lunchtime on Monday. And Luke, I'll just leave it to you. We're going to have months and months and weeks to dissect this. This is just sort of our first go-round, but and I think you and I, even in the aftermath of the game, I don't think you and I have spoken literally, privately, next to each other. We were sitting next to each other when the whole thing sort of broke down. I don't think we've spoken a word, so have at it, my friend.
Yeah, well, I really echo what you said at the start of our conversation here. Even a day later, as we get into the first week of the new year, Happy New Year, everyone.
I'm eating chocolate, so I'm eating on the air. I'm being unprofessional because such is my day. It's 2018. Why change now?
You're just eating your feelings about the Ravens, right? I mean, that's what they call that, right?
Where's the wine?
But I'm with you. I can't exactly believe that it happened. And it's not as though I thought this team was on the verge of going on a run. I made very clear I wasn't a big fan of this football team as far as what their ceiling was. Heck, I picked them to go 8-8 at the start of the season. So
you thought it would end. You just didn't think it would end on Sunday.
Yeah, I thought they were going to win. Certainly, you look at the odds when you consider the fact they only had to beat a six-win team, and they had two different outs, so to speak, as far as two different teams being able to help them, whether it's Jacksonville or Miami. And you were I think everyone was preparing for a trip to the playoffs. Certainly didn't see many people having over-the-top concerns about Cincinnati, even though we all knew that Marvin Lewis and the Bengals had given the Ravens as much trouble as anyone, especially in Baltimore over the last 3 to 4 years. So I think, it wasn't as though I thought it was a complete slam dunk, but especially when you're talking about having a 3-point lead with under a minute to go, and it's 4th and 12, and it's Andy Dalton. And to that point in the game, you had done a heck of a job not letting A.J. Green beat you. So you're looking at, okay, well, Tyler Croft caught a couple touchdowns, and they have some other weapons, but no one that really strikes fear into your heart. And lo and behold, it's a guy who I think came into Sunday's game with 16 or 17 catches on the season. Just unbelievable to think that of all people, Tyler Boyd from Andy Dalton was going to end your season. And
it has some Tony Fernandez to it, doesn't it?
Yeah,
right?
It really does. It's stunning. I mean, I said as soon as the game ended, I thought it was the most devastating home loss in franchise history. And then I had a few replies, and I started thinking about it more. I'd say most devastating was the 2006 playoff loss to Indy.
That's the same feeling I had. I mean, I said to my wife, I'm blubbering. The only other time I've blubbered, I didn't even blubber after, I don't know how I processed the Cundiff thing. There was a lot of self-pity, a lot of fear and loathing, and a lot of that, but there's no doubt that loss to the Colts that night in 06, that was a bottom place that I don't even think for whatever reason the Cundiff thing, this one really is a kick in the nuts because I think Ozzie and John, this sort of Flacco, this sort of era here, when you get kicked out and it's been 4 or 5 years now, all of a sudden, as I left the stadium and walked back in the cold of the evening on a 10-degree night or whatever the hell it was, I said, "Wow, man, this reminds me of how Billick got fired and just sort of like, all right, we got to do something else here." I don't know that that's what's going to happen, but I felt like it could happen.
Yeah, I think it's one of those losses, and more so than devastating, as I came around and quite a few people replied to that comment saying, no way, 2006 Indy playoff loss, and I agree, that was the most devastating because that team had a real chance to go to the Super Bowl. I don't think anyone was really looking at this team realistically as saying, hey, I'll bet you money that they're going to be playing in Minnesota in 5 weeks. I don't think anyone really thought that could happen. I thought, there was a possibility maybe they could go on a run, maybe give Pittsburgh a scare in the second round.
I saw you and me in the parking lot up in Foxborough. I mean, I really did. I thought, they have the pedigree for this. It's been a couple of years. They're getting healthier. They got veteran guys. Suggs playing far beyond where I thought he could play. I have high expectations for Flacco. So when he plays well and when he pulls the rabbit out of the hat, I just kind of see that as who he is. You know what I mean? And I don't know that he'll ever be appreciated for that, but certainly, you can hang the season on him, the offense, the first half, but they did have a lead. They did have a 4th and 12. They just needed to make one play, and Flacco wouldn't be the GOAT, and Harbaugh wouldn't be the GOAT, and Dean Pease wouldn't be the GOAT, and Eric Weddle, and Kennedy, and I don't know exactly what happened schematically on that play, but, there's never going to be a play that we're going to break down that was a dagger, an absolute dagger play in the difference, other than Billy Cundiff, as to what could have been in the tournament or whether they would have gone out to Kansas City and been representative on Saturday. I don't know. Ifs and buts and candy and nuts and all that stuff. But now all of a sudden we go very, very quickly, my man, from what's wrong with the offense, and can they patch this up? And, geez, they didn't have any wide receivers, and, Flacco's aging, and where's Ozzie? And, what's going to really happen to Suggs because he can't continue to do this? And where are we with Weddle? And we gave Williams all the money, and CJ's coming up now. And, all of those football questions. But it really does begin with, there aren't going to be any more empty seats anymore, right? So we're not going down that pathway until the PSLs and all the stuff I wrote about 2 weeks ago. Now we go very quickly into Peter Angelosville, which is who's running the organization, who's calling the shots, who's the coach, who are the assistant coaches, where are the holes? And I feel like this is a cold splash of water, even for you and I, to begin getting our arms around that conversation, because quite frankly, I didn't spend any time in December thinking about that. It was always, let's not get tripped up by Deshaun Kaiser. Let's not let Chuck Pagano come in here and get inspired. Let's not let A.J. Green get over the top on a 4th and 12 to get beaten, with 30 seconds left to go in the season so you don't make the playoffs. So, I had all those thoughts, but I hadn't really thought about, Ozzie's been here 22 years, and every year DeCosta gets 5, turns at this. There are 10 head coaches now. I mean, you wake up on Monday morning, it's Black Monday, and, Del Rio's getting canned here, and Pagano's gone there, and Jim Caldwell's gone over here, and, and that is the life of the next 72 hours in the league, right? And you hold on for that first, because certainly in the aftermath, it could be a crazy week in Owings Mills this week. It could be, or it could be, hey, we lost on a play, and let's go get a new defensive coordinator. Let's go hire Pagano or promote Wink and stability and all that stuff that they always preach. But I know the fan base is, enraged at this point. But I don't know where Bisciotti is, and everybody says, well, what do you think, Luke? What do you think, Nestor? Dude, there's only one person that thinks here, and it ain't even Ozzie. And it's not Kevin Byrne or John Harbaugh. I mean, the last time this went down, making Brian Billick our partner here at WNST, this was literally Steve Bisciotti in the middle of the night coming in and doing it, and saying, I want change. And he certainly reserves the right to do that, and I don't want to say he's in witness protection or hibernating at this point, but I can't imagine how he feels seeing this thing play out with 35,000 empty seats. I mean, I don't know. This is a real crisis point in his ownership to get Angelosian, and I don't know how he's going to react. I mean, my guess is stability will reign and Harbaugh's not going anywhere, but I don't know that to be true.
Yeah, and that's where I am on this matter. I mean, I'm not going to be the guy that sits here and just blanketly says, fire the GM, fire the coach, clean house, get rid of all your scouts, get rid of all of your assistants, cut the quarterback. I mean, and believe me, there are many layers and many degrees to which you could argue at least some of those factors. But I'm with you from a standpoint of this loss was so stunning. and frankly unacceptable. And as I wrote at WNST.net, and you know me, Ness, I'm not someone who throws around terms like choke or questioning effort or saying someone mailed it in or anything like that. But
this can't happen. This can't stand.
I use the word choke here.
Yeah.
And I'm not questioning anyone's effort. I'm not doing that at all. But this was a choke job. This was a team that came into Sunday with a 97% chance, if you looked at Football Outsiders or ESPN, all the different odds. And I know odds are odds, and that's why they play the games on the field. We all understand that. And even on that 4th and 12 play, I think their win probability at that point, if you're someone that is interested in that kind of stuff, well, it was 93%. They choked. I mean, there's no nice way of putting it. So when you have a loss like that, and I thought it's interesting that you mentioned the end of the Billick era, I think it's tough not to think about that. I think it's tough not to view what happened on Sunday as the very clear, bottom. I don't know if I'd say bottoming out because that implies that it's going to end then, but it's the lowest point of the Harbaugh era. And
they put themselves in a position where an arm reach by Antonio Brown or a 4th and 12 over the top to Tyler Boyd will exterminate you in December. Yeah. And, that comes on the wings of a lot of things, right? Bad luck, good luck, injuries, good decisions, bad decisions, Brashad Perryman's and Zach Orr, bad luck there in that. I mean, there's all sorts of things that have happened, but the good teams don't worry about that on the final day of the year, And it's been close. It's been good. It's been, through adversity and all of those things. But, if it really is about making the playoffs and winning championships around here, the results, and as Jack Del Rio says, it's a results business, right? Like, the results at this point aren't good enough. And I think that, in addition to the civil unrest here, that is unprecedented. Right, Luke? I mean, let's call it the way it is. If you're Steve Bisciotti and you're sitting in that chair, you can't fathom that this has happened to your fan base over the last 12 weeks and how it's deteriorated on the backside of the Kaepernick-Goodell thing in the summer, on the backside of 2.5 years ago, all the Ray Rice stuff and the loafer press conference that stayed on and on. And I would think that he's getting to a point where he might want to sell the franchise. I don't know that he really relishes in these moments as much as holding the trophy was a good time and that it's been a hell of an investment, right, if he were to sell it for $1.8 billion to whomever. But that's also a question on the backside of this is, he's had the toy 15 years. He was a young man when he bought into this, and there's a lot of accountability and a lot of civic weight around this that I don't know that he relishes on the dark side. And this is the dark side. These are the dog days, right? This is the antithesis of the parade through the city, right?
Yeah, and I want to go back to something you said in talking about what happened, obviously, on Sunday, the touchdown to Boyd. You referenced Roethlisberger to Antonio Brown, the immaculate extension, I guess they call it in Pittsburgh. And you even go back to 2014, the divisional round, when Tom Brady and the Patriots erased 2 different 14-point deficits against the Ravens secondary. Let's face it. I mean, they had Rashawn Melvin, they had Anthony Levine playing corner, which we know he's more of a dime hybrid kind of guy, and they had Ladarius Webb on his last leg of the corner. I mean, that was an undermanned secondary, playing without Jimmy Smith. But my point is, I'm going to go back to last year. And, this is something I talked about a lot. I wrote about it at WNST.net over and over. I touched on it again in my post-game comments into the wee hours Monday morning, that there was so much attention paid to that one play, that one failure to get a stop against Pittsburgh. And I remember sitting talking with you Christmas night after that game, and the point that I kind of brought up, and we kind of volleyed it back and forth, was the Ravens were so close, but which way are they moving here? Are they moving towards something, or are they close but moving in the wrong direction? And let's think about this for a second. Those 3 breakdowns that I just referenced, it's one thing that this happens against Tom Brady in the divisional round. I mean, my goodness, you're talking about arguably the greatest quarterback in the history of the league. As much as that's painful at the time, as time goes on, you accept it a little bit more. You don't like it, but hey, you lost to the best. You lost to a team that ended up winning the Super Bowl. Last year, it was against Ben Roethlisberger and Antonio Brown. It was on the road. We knew the Ravens secondary wasn't very good without Jimmy Smith. We had seen that for a couple weeks leading up to that. Again, doesn't mean it's acceptable, but hey, at least you lost to future Hall of Famers there. This was against Andy freaking Dalton and Tyler Boyd in your home stadium. And look, we'll talk about attendance a lot. There's so many different layers to that. I think as far as how this organization proceeds from a standpoint of, do they make changes to their front office? Do they make coaching changes? I think
there's a psychological thing going on here for Bisciotti that didn't exist prior to this mess. You know?
There is. There's no doubt. And what, again, I want to remind everyone, the empty seats thing didn't just start this year. Go back, and I even looked at the transcript from last year's season-ending press conference. Dick Cass was asked flat out that there were noticeably some more empty seats. Now, wasn't to the degree that we saw this year. Clearly, we know the factors at work here, whether you're talking about anthem protests or, let's face it, a product now where the Ravens have missed the playoffs 4 out of 5 years. But, my point is, I think the mistake that the Ravens made last year, and I'll stand by this, and if anyone wants to argue, then you can argue about it. But I still think the Ravens went about it the wrong way from looking just at that play with Antonio Brown reaching the ball over the goal line and saying, hey, we were one play away. So what did they do as a result? They loaded up on defense. Even though if you watch the entire 2016 product, you saw that they had a below-average offense. Well, you saw what happened. Now, that said, the defense didn't get the job done in the end. So, you can blame Dean Pease. I mean, he's riding off into retirement now. I think you could make a very valid argument, and that's someone speaking as someone who's been a bigger supporter of Dean Pease than others in town. I think you absolutely make the argument that maybe you need some new blood there. And I'm not so sure I would have brought Dean Pease back even if he hadn't decided to retire officially on Monday. But my point is, I think this team needs to start taking a more serious, aggressive, and when I say serious, I don't want to say that they're not trying, but I think they need to be a little more concerned with the entire body of work leading up to that play at the very end. And that's where you see an offense that is woefully short when it comes to skill position talent. That's where you see some of the shortcomings that this team had. I mean, as much as we talk about the play at the end, and the defense choked, that was a horrible performance by the Ravens collectively in the first half. And that's a reflection on John Harbaugh. And that's coming a week after they didn't exactly play all that inspiring football against Indianapolis. That, to me, is a red flag. And I'm a Harbaugh guy. I think he's done a heck of a job. I think if the Ravens decided to let him go, he'd have a job by next week sometime. But that's a red flag. So I think you need to look at this as not saying we're one play away. I think you need to look at this as saying, I think our vision, I think our methodology, I think our best practices that, hey, to their credit, worked for a really, really long time. I think you have to be realistic with yourself and look in the mirror and say, hey, the way that we've proceeded now in 5 seasons since Super Bowl 47, ever since giving Joe Flacco the big contract, which any team would have done in that position, and certainly we can debate the merits of Joe Flacco and what he does well, what he doesn't do well, but I'm sorry. I look at what they've done over the last 5 years with maybe 2014 being the exception, which, was the one time they've made the playoffs, and I've seen a team that is continuously trying to recreate the 2000 Ravens defense without a 25-year-old Ray Lewis, without, if you want to go into a few years later, a young Ed Reed coming along. And I think the lesson there is it's really tough to build a great, great defense. They built good defenses. Statistically, this is a good defense, just like it was last year. It's not a horrible defense, but my point is you're trying to win with this unbalanced roster where you pump everything into defense and you're not really getting to the next level. Okay, you can change up the defensive coordinator. At the same time, I look at this and say, well, you keep asking Joe Flacco to try. You want him to do more, but you keep giving him less. And you know he's not Tom Brady. You know he's not Aaron Rodgers. As much as anyone wants him to be that, he's not that. This guy's going to be 33 years old later this month. He is what he is. So I think maybe instead of continuing to go about being hell-bent on building a great defense and then shopping at the dollar store for your offense, maybe you need to change your approach. Maybe you need to say, maybe it's time to pump some more resources into the offense, and maybe we don't have an offense that is woefully inept for the first 3 months of the season. Or maybe we don't have an offense that has one first down until the very end of the first half in the biggest game of the season. I just think you keep trying to do the same thing over and over. They say that's the definition of insanity, right? Do the same thing over and over and expect different results. And yet here we are. We're talking about the same exact narrative. But now you compound that with what's very much a cooling of fan interest, regardless of the motives, regardless of why people are staying away. It's very clear people are staying away. So I'm not sure if you can just look at this and say, okay, well, we're going to keep Marty Mornhinweg because, we really like what we did towards the end of the season, and we're just going to promote Wink Martindale, and Dean Pease is going to retire, but we're going to maintain as much continuity there. I know we talked about it at this in kind of the residue of the season-ending press conference, and I remember vividly saying that continuity is great, but you know what? You got to be careful with continuity because it can easily turn into complacency, and I'm not so sure there's not some of that at work at this point in time. And that's not to say the Ravens, that it's impossible for them to get this thing turned around with the current group, but I don't know. I just really over the last couple of years, you get the sense that maybe people are a little too comfortable in this building top to bottom. And that's not to say you have to blow it up, but maybe that is to say that maybe you bring in an outside defensive coordinator. And maybe that means Chuck Pagano, who, yes, I get it, was a former Ravens assistant, but he's been gone for 6 years. So maybe, it is a fresh set of eyes. And, there's only a couple players left from when he was here. Maybe it is you need to go out and be a little more bold in hiring a different offensive coordinator or maybe an up-and-coming quarterbacks coach to work with Joe Flacco a little bit more and maybe, get him to improve his footwork a little bit better, and maybe he doesn't have this whole going through the first 3 months of the season playing so poorly and then turning it on late. Certainly, how I feel about this team's lack of additions to just make this offense better in general. This methodology of doing as little as possible and hoping that everything goes perfectly, and if it does, your offense might be average. That needs to stop. That doesn't work. We've been over this. The same thing happened in 2013. It happened in 2015. It happened last year. And it happened this past year. I mean, it just, at some point in time, when do you realize we might need to get Joe Flacco a little more help? And then if you do, and he's still not performing at a higher level, then you know that it's time to start thinking about the future there as far as finding your next franchise quarterback. So I think the worst thing the Ravens can do is proceed in the same way that they did last year and just say, we were one play away. So guess what? We're going to build more on our defense. And we're going to add another linebacker. And we're going to add it's not to say you can't tweak your defense. I'm not saying that at all. But this idea that they just continue to go defense, and doing, just a little bit to your offense. I mean, how many times do we have to talk about this until you kind of realize that maybe
at least until September, because they're not going to play again until then, right?
Well, but we'll see. We'll see if what free agent money they have is allotted towards the defense or the offense. We'll see with the draft. I mean, we talked about it a lot with the draft. I mean, I've cited this a million times, and I'll continue to cite it. 17 day one and day two picks in Super Bowl 47. 13 of those have been defensive players. I get it. Joe Flacco's making a lot of money. I get it. He's got a huge cap number. I understand that you can't go out and spend all of your cap money on offensive players to put around them because you do have to field a defense, and you want to have a good defense. I understand all of that. So my point is, well, then you need to go cheaper on the offensive side. And how do you do that? Use some draft picks. And the few that they've used, well, Rashad Perriman was inactive on Sunday. Max
They've
Williams.
used a lot on tight ends, though, right? I mean, when you think about what they've tried to do, that on draft day, when it came time to pull a number out, right? Tight end's been the place they've gone more so than wide receiver, where I don't even know that they trust themselves.
Yeah, well, I mean, but they need to address that. They can't just keep doing the whole, well, we're not very good at doing that, so we're not going to do that. Well, become better at it. It kind of reminds me of the Orioles, with starting pitching. If it's a blind spot, you need to address it. You can't just punt. And that's kind of what the Ravens have done on the offensive side of the ball for far too many times over the last 4 or 5 years. But, my point is, you're not going to get better on that side of the ball if you don't put more resources into it. You kind of get what you pay for. And, hey, I'll give Joe Flacco and this offense, which was, had Mike Wallace and Quincy Adebayo as their last standing receivers with the season on the line at the very end. I mean, you got to be kidding me. And I get it. They had some injuries, but at the same time, I don't think anyone, if they're being honest, if they're being objective, I don't think anyone could look at this offense and say if it were fully healthy that it would be, a great offense. Maybe it could have been okay. Maybe it could have been average. And like I said, I give Joe Flacco a lot of credit for finally finding a way to make it work toward the end of the season. And how much of that was health, how much of that was adjusting the play calling and being more aggressive. It's some of both, I'm sure. But this offense constantly, it's like a foot race where the defense gets a 10-second head start and the offense is, inevitably needing to pull its weight and always in catch-up mode. And, they figured it out a little bit late last year. They figured it out a little bit late this year. But, how about actually looking like you want to try to build a great offense for once instead of just doing it all with the defense? Because, well, they've tried that, and look how many defensive players they've drafted, look how many they've signed, and it's still the same result. Good, but hasn't been great. And I just think at some point you need to make some adjustments here. And if Ozzie Newsome and John Harbaugh and Eric DeCosta, if they're not willing to do that, if they're not willing to acknowledge that, then maybe you do need to make more drastic changes. I don't know. I just think we are reaching a point here where I know it's not the Browns. I know it's not that bad, but at the same time, this team has a 500 record over the last 5 years. That's not great. And the problem with that is it's not so bad that you're getting high draft picks and early draft picks, and it's not good enough to get you to the postseason, so you're kind of stuck in between. So
with the 16th pick, again, actually, right?
Yeah, I don't have all the answers. I want to make that very clear, but I just see the same methodology being used year after year, and it's not working. So, maybe you need to try something different. I don't know.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke out on Twitter, as well as Luke at WNST.net. All of our programming here brought to you by our great friends at Freedmont Mortgage. Don't make a 30-year mistake by choosing the wrong lender. We're now into 2018. If you're looking for some advice on buying, selling a home, or refinancing, find our friends out at Freedmont Mortgage at Freedmont.com. D&O Window Tinting, 26 years of tinting everything, cars, boats, businesses. Boy, I wish I could wrap my condo up here and keep us warm during these cold days. They take away the squint on the, especially when that ice and the snow gets down. You know what I'm talking about, the whiteout conditions. You need some tinting on your vehicle. Go see them at Parkville or White Marsh. It's DNL Window Tinting. Luke, I guess the bigger picture here is which way are they really going to go? To your point, Harbaugh would be hired in like a minute. He would be the New York Giants, coach tomorrow morning, right, or whatever it would be. And I don't know that change for change's sake, but historically, where this franchise is in that Steve still has never hired a football guy, right? He's just re-endorsed Ozzie Newsome and has been much, much more than maybe any other owner other than maybe a Jerry Jones type that has been one system, one way, one philosophy that everyone buys into. Even Harbaugh was usurped from the outside in. And yeah, they've moved to him a little bit, but it's been Ozzie's show, and it's been Ozzie's show for 22 years. At some point, Ozzie's just going to say, I've had enough, and Eric's been kind of hanging on to be the next guy. And that's been the plan. And I know down in Maryland they had a plan, right? The plan is that the Penn State coach who went to Vanderbilt was right. They have all these plans that maybe get enacted or don't get enacted. Around here, there's only ever been one plan, and the only guy that's ever been kicked out of the boat was Billick. Literally, right?
Yeah, it's pretty much. And to your point, Ozzie Newsome's not going to be there forever. And I don't know if that's this year, and I certainly don't think he gets canned or fired. I don't know if he would retire. I don't know if they would put him into more of a president role, and Eric kind of takes over the day-to-day, so to speak, the nuts and bolts of being the GM, with Ozzie maybe being more of in a consultant role. I don't know. But you know how I've thought about this. Yes, the coaching needs to take its ownership, and certainly they've had issues at offensive coordinator. Certainly you can question Dean Pease, and I think you absolutely can ask whether bringing him back would have been the right thing, even if he hadn't retired. So that aside, I've seen this roster just really be devoid of playmakers. I think they've fallen short in building an offense time and time again, and I think that they haven't done their franchise quarterback any favors.
And there were some drops and yips and stumbles, in the kind of game that gets you eliminated when you have that, when you put that on your offense on a 20-degree day in late December in a 4 o'clock game. You can't drop that first down pass across the middle. You can't short arm or long arm it if you're Flacco. You can't miss your block and get your quarterback killed. You can't throw the big pick. And I'll say that for Flacco, for all the bullets flying out there and for all the problems they had. Man, whatever the picks that were there for the most part, there was the one little lollipop I remember over in the corner about 8-9 weeks ago. But, he sort of eliminated a little bit of that, and even the pick six was the most ridiculous play you'll ever see, right?
Yeah, Chris Moore juggling the ball, and it pops in the air and just hangs there for an interception. But going back to Ozzie Newsome and just some of the issues that I've seen from a personnel standpoint, even this defense. Think about it. Think how many draft picks. Think how many free agent contracts that they've spent on this defense, and what's the return been? I said it this past offseason. I thought this defense needed to be great, meaning like a top 2, top 3 kind of unit. And I know some of the football analytics sites, like Football Outsiders, love this defense, for example. But I think if you watch it with your eyeballs, you saw what happened when they went up against the Ben Roethlisberger, when they didn't have Jimmy Smith facing Matt Stafford in the second
very,
half.
very susceptible to tight ends specifically, and elite wide receivers, and the troubles that come when A.J. Green is out on the field and 2 feet later, Tyler Boyd ends your season. Literally, we saw this unfold, and, fans want somebody to pay for it with their job or whatever, but it really was a collective effort on, I don't know where to point fingers anywhere on Sunday. It was a collective. They got themselves eliminated. There should be no question as to whether they were a playoff team or not. They were not.
Yeah, they weren't. They have no one to blame but themselves. And I'll go back to a point I made a little bit earlier about how unprepared and how flat they looked in the first half. And that's a reflection on John there. Especially when they didn't play all that great against Indy. But going back to Ozzie Newsome and going back to the defense for just a moment here. Even some of their players that have worked out. Think about it. C.J. Mosley came a year after they drafted Arthur Brown. Eric Weddle and Tony Jefferson, which, I think the jury's still out on Tony Jefferson, whether that was, year one, I'd give a thumbs down on that contract considering how much they committed to him. But, Eric Weddle.
And how much they loved him. He was the belle of the ball for them, right? They really thought he was an absolute surefire great player. They believed that.
But be honest. Did he really give them that much of an upgrade over guys like Darian Stewart and Kendrick Lewis and Ladarius Webb last year? No, I don't think the bang for the buck was there. Be a better player? Okay, sure. But was he a better player to get? Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Was he a guy that was absolutely a difference maker? I'd say no. And I think we saw him have his issues. But my point is, Eric Weddle and Tony Jefferson, who preceded them? Matt Elam and Terrence Brooks. I mean, it's just, even this defense where, supposedly, I mean, that's what this organization's calling card is supposed to be, and we know about the history. And it's not to say that they haven't developed some really good players the last few years. And Brandon Williams just got paid a huge, lucrative contract. C.J. Mosley's probably going to get a big contract this spring at some point.
By the way, I always point at how much money the other guys got too. The Arthur Joneses and the Pernell McPhees and
sure.
the Krugers, the guys who went out the side door got paid too, and none of them, universally. All of them, McPhee for 5 minutes, but they universally weren't very good when they left, and Ozzie made a good business decision by deciding I want Brandon Williams, and I'll keep C.J. Mosley, and we like having Ladarius Webb around, but letting other guys go for whatever reason, right?
Yeah, but
the one safety panned out, though, that they ran out of here, right?
But what my point is, that they've had to fix a lot of mistakes there. They've had to fix a lot of misses. I mean, let's look at the draft the last few years. 2016, and I get it, it's early, but you know what? It was early at one point for Arthur Brown and Matt Elam and Terrence Brooks, and eventually you kind of figure out, hey, they can't play.
Yeah, it's getting late on Correa right now, though, right?
But you look at Correa, he's a special teams guy, and I know some people have talked about the fact that, he was an outside linebacker, and okay, there might be some merit to that, but you look at that, you look at Bronson Kafusi, this year. Juju Smith-Schuster could have been a Raven. The Ravens wanted Tyus Bowser instead. Now, I don't know if Smith-Schuster be any good with the Ravens, and Tyus Bowser may end up being a Pro Bowler. But the Ravens, of their 4 picks that they had in the first 3 rounds this past year, Marlon Humphrey, check it off. Good pick. As much as you didn't like to see Jimmy Smith get hurt, he stepped in and did a really nice job. You would have loved to have Jimmy Smith and him on the field rather than Brandon Carr, who struggled down the stretch. But beyond that, they didn't get anything from any of those other, Tim Williams, nothing this year. Chris Wormley, nothing this year. Tyus Bowser, a nice little start, but really, from the time that he really struggled in that Jacksonville game in London, never really saw him make much of an impact from that point on. So, you've drafted all these defensive players, you've added all these defensive players, and again, considering the resources, that should be an unbelievable defense. And, well, you saw what happened on Sunday. So, how much of that is on coaching? They deserve their part, although I'll say this, you can talk about some of these, these draft picks and maybe not developing guys, but what failed draft picks have moved on elsewhere? I mean, Arthur Brown was with 3 or 4 other teams. After a while, you just chalk it up to, well, the guy can't play, because you would think after 4 or 5 stops, someone would be able to figure it out with him if he was truly as good as he was supposed to be. So that's where I'm a little less inclined to just blame the coaching because, about the only recent draft pick over the last 4 to 5 years that didn't stick here but went on and had success, John Simon. And we're not talking about John Simon like he's Von Miller. He's been a good player.
Yeah, he got on the field in a way he couldn't get on the field here, right?
Yeah. So that's the one. I'll give you that one. Beyond that, tell me who all these great draft picks that the Ravens, that these coaches couldn't develop. Well, tell me about these guys that went elsewhere and were really good, and then the coaching staff has egg on its face. So if it's not that, then you got to put at least most of it on the front office, right? And, whether it's Ozzie, whether it's Joe Ortiz, whether it's Eric DaCosta, whether it's the scouts, it's all of them. So I think, again, I'll go back to my point. I think the worst thing the Ravens can do here is not take what happened on Sunday seriously from a standpoint of, I think you need to be more aggressive here in revamping some things. Does it mean you blow it all up? No, not necessarily, but I don't think the answer is just to say, well, we're just going to replace Dean Pease as he retires, and we'll add some more defensive players. We'll fill in a couple of holes offensively and kind of go about it the same way. I don't think that's going to be good enough from a football standpoint, and I damn sure don't think it's going to be good enough from a fan perception standpoint. And that's where this whole issue does get more interesting, does get more enticing from a standpoint of, these aren't just football decisions, but when you have a fan base where The perception is down as much as it is, and the fans who were there on Sunday witnessed what happened at the very end. I think there is a little more of a business and imaging standpoint, a little more of that variable to this. And it's not that doesn't mean you fire John Harbaugh because, you want someone new and you just do it for the sake of doing it. But I will say, if you are Steve Bisciotti and you're starting to have some doubts as far as whether this thing is moving forward or whether it's just completely plateaued, and hey, missing the playoffs 4 out of 5 years, I think that argument can at least be made that it's plateaued.
Yeah, we let the Bills into the playoffs for crying out loud,
I mean,
right?
So, and that's the other thing, and I'm glad you mentioned that because this is a point I did want to make, and we're jumping all around.
We shall. I mean, there's a lot of meat on this bone here for the next couple months.
There really is, but let's think about this. I fully understand the Ravens had a slew of injuries early in the season. Did that limit their ceiling? Absolutely. It's a big reason why I thought they would be an 8-8 football team and miss the playoffs. But when you consider how the season progressed and you look at the number of backup quarterbacks and rookie quarterbacks that this team faced, and you look at their schedule in relation to a lot of teams, and how things set up, and how the month of December set up.
It was brought to my attention by a rival AFC North coach that his team had to play the starting quarterback of the Houston Texans as well as the starting quarterback of the Green Bay Packers, and the Ravens did not, right?
So when you look at that, and look, the Ravens won most of those games that I just mentioned. But you look on the flip side, and you see that this team didn't beat a single team that ended up making the playoffs, and they beat one team that finished with a winning record, and that's Detroit. So that tells you what? They didn't win any games that you went into it and say they weren't supposed to win. And if they had held on against Pittsburgh on that Sunday night a few weeks ago, that would have been their statement game. That would have been their signature game. And, by the way, they would have been in the playoffs and would have been in a position where they could have clinched going into Week 17. So they didn't win any games that you looked at on paper and say, I don't think they really had any business winning that game. And inevitably, you got to win. You got to win some tough games. You got to beat some winning teams. You got to beat a Pittsburgh. You got to beat a Tennessee on the road. I mean, you got to
beat Chicago at home.
And I'm going to get to my next point then. So you have that, and then what happened on the flip side? They lost a couple games they shouldn't have lost. No business losing to Chicago. And let's face it, and I know the Bengals have given the Ravens trouble. I give the Bengals a lot of credit for the way that they played on Sunday, but you can't lose to a 6-9 football team. You just can't. Now, you can't lose to a 6-9 football team that's been one of the worst offenses in the league and is missing they were down 2 starting linebackers and they were missing some other players. That can't happen. That's not an acceptable loss. So you didn't win any games you weren't supposed to win, and then you lost a couple games that you shouldn't have lost. Well, that adds up to missing the playoffs more often than not. So you just kind of get into that. This schedule set up very nicely for the Ravens. You can talk about the injuries. You can talk about weird things that happened, some bad luck at one time or another.
Cincinnati coming to town with no linebackers and everybody banged up and offensive line in tatters. Yeah, man.
I mean, I'll be honest with you. You put this schedule and drop it into 2010 or 2011, those Ravens teams.
13-3.
13-3, no question about it. Talking about a first-round bye, maybe home field throughout. So that's where you look at this and say, all right, they came up just short, but
those teams also went on the road to Jacksonville and got their ass kicked. And, ran for 28 yards on the ground on 4 rushes and,
those teams
crazy
also won
things.
some games. On the flip side, they won some games that you didn't necessarily expect them to win, and that's something this team did not do this year. So,
Especially at home. They always won home.
Right. And that's the thing. This team lost 3 home games, and 2 of them were to teams with losing records. I mean, really? So, and then you start looking ahead, and I know we could do this. This is something that a lot of people do, and normally I don't like it, but take a look at the 2018 road schedule right now for the Ravens. I don't have it in front of me, but just take a look. Anyone listening, when you get a chance, take a look. at what that road schedule looks like compared to what the Ravens encountered this year.
Atlanta, Carolina, Nashville, the Chargers, and the Chiefs. They're all playoff teams.
There is some travel there. There is some real serious competition there. Inevitably, one or two of those teams will end up stinking because we know that's how it works. But my point is, when you have a year where the schedule sets up so nicely, the competition isn't exactly all that rigid in the AFC. I mean, right now, I know that the Titans beat the Ravens. Do I really think the Titans are markedly better than the Ravens? No. Do I think the Buffalo Bills are better than the Ravens? Absolutely not. But that said, the Ravens didn't win Week 17, and those teams did. So
Tyrod's playing this week.
They deserve to go to the playoffs, and the Ravens don't. So my point is, I feel like on top of just missing the playoffs again, I felt like it's set up to be a really nice opportunity, even with all the injuries, even with everything that went wrong for this team over the last several months. It was sitting right there for them to at least make the playoffs. And, hey, go to Kansas City. Would I have picked the Chiefs to win? Probably. But I wouldn't have been sitting here saying the Ravens can't go to Arrowhead and win a game against a Chiefs team that was pretty lousy.
I saw Tucker hitting a 38-yarder to win it, 23-21 or something. That's what I saw.
But because that didn't happen, it forces you to kind of keep continuing to look at the big picture and start asking yourself, well, I don't expect Steve Bisciotti to fire John Harbaugh, but maybe what Bill Walsh said and Brian Billick echoed it years ago, he's 10 years into this thing. Maybe it has gotten stale. Maybe it has plateaued. Maybe you do need to start thinking about what's next for this organization. Same thing could apply for Ozzie. Same thing could apply for Joe Flacco, even though we know from a cap standpoint, it's still another year away before that really becomes a legitimate conversation. I'm not saying to throw all them to the curb, but hey, this is 4 out of 5 years. This is now the longest stretch the Ravens have had without a playoff appearance since their first 4 seasons in Baltimore. Let that marinate a little bit for you.
All right. On that note, I'll break this off, and we'll come back and be discussing more of all of this. We got to grab a break here and come up for air at some point. Luke's been writing about it out at WNST.net. You can find him, Luke, at WNST.net, as well as Baltimore Luke on Twitter. Of course, if there's any breaking news, anything huge, weird, Ozzie, John, decisions, as it was with Dean Pease, you'll get it first on the WNST text service. That's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. And Dennis Colatzos will be here on Thursday, driving you home from 3 until 5. It is the SSV on WNST. Our morning newspaper ships every day here in 2018 to your email inbox. It's all brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com, where it's still $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life, guaranteed. Last but never least, the BuyAToyota.com audio vault is there for anything you want to listen to, whenever you want to listen to it. You can also listen live by downloading our TuneIn radio app. It's all brought to you by BuyAToyota.com. I am Nestor, nasty at WNST.net finds me on the internet. My 3-part series of the Ghost of Baltimore football, past, present, and future, up for you. We will be monitoring all things Ravens in the aftermath of this catastrophic 4th and 12th meltdown. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.